This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic, the audio advertising specialists with over 25 years experience. For more, visit trisonic.co.uk.
If you don't allow creators and your audience to play with your brand in the right way, you haven't understood where we're at in 2025.
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. There's a lot going on at the BBC at the moment. A pair of scandals relating to a Gaza documentary and former MasterChef presenter Greg Wallace have caused a stir, and the timing isn't great the year before negotiations on a new royal charter, especially as a further 300,000 households have reportedly stopped paying the license fee. But the Beeb's commercial arm is in rude health, achieving record revenues and profit in its latest earnings report. To thrive in the next era of media consumption, the BBC is adapting to reach audiences where they are and stave off competition from streaming rivals and social platforms. That's why I was delighted to speak with Jasmine Dawson, BBC Studios Senior Vice President of Digital, earlier this month about what the broadcaster's commercial arm is doing to modernize its go-to-market strategy. The key focuses, as you'll hear, are driving fandom for its IP and providing reliable measurement of engagement in a fragmented social environment. This is our conversation. I hope you enjoy. Jasmine Dawson, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jasmine, you've had quite a decently long career in media so far. You've been at the BBC for a number of years. You were at Mediacom beforehand. I'm curious, how did you get into the media industry in the first place, and then what landed you at the Beeb?
So I've been at BBC Studios for coming up for 7 years now. And it's been a wonderful ride and somewhere that I have always wanted to work. And I think that's because I've always just been fascinated by storytelling, and BBC Group as a whole is a real leader and has been for decades in storytelling. The ability of media to be able to shape that storytelling and the nuances of different platforms and the innovation that has happened, that is where I've always sort of felt that the opportunity and the real appetite of sort of both the audiences and agencies and advertisers sort of really pushed and moved the needle, which is where I sort of found myself early on in my career and was able to sort of learn a lot about the different types of storytelling through different types of media sort of across the globe. So having worked in London and in New York, I think with those sort of different insights have come a real understanding of there are opportunities to be global storytellers and there's real opportunity to lean in and be an amazing storyteller in a niche. And that really sparked an emotional connection for me.
So when we spoke previously at the Future of Audio and Entertainment conference here in London, we discussed how media consumption habits have been shifting, and it's no surprise to anyone that's listening to this podcast for sure. So tell me, in terms of BBC Studios' perspective, how have you been working to follow those trends?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so building upon the conversation that we had previously, we talked about the fact that we know that audiences today are platform agnostic. They expect that high quality content wherever they are, whether that's on TV, streaming, YouTube, TikTok. So our approach has always been about meeting the audience where they are, not expecting them to come to us, which means adapting our content strategy and our measurement to each environment. So for us, that really focused us on thinking about what does it mean to have an engaged view and what differentiates a fan versus a passive viewer. So we don't just want to rely on reach, because whilst we can compete in some specific areas, especially in kids and family on reach, why we want to sort of double down on relevance is really important, because we think it's relevance that drives the needle and moves us into commercial impact rather than just about sort of scale and sort of really trying to say, well, we're the platform that can deliver that sort of lowest cost per reach. For us, fandom is about that engaged view. And then also moving on to something next. What are we wanting for that sort of individual and our audiences to be able to do with us? We don't just want them to view our content, we want them to feel moved. And for us, that means looking at a lot of different measures, whether it's down to sort of our UGC and sort of measuring sort of how our audiences are playing with our brands, as well as time spent. Time spent is our biggest indicator that someone is actually a fan of what we do and not just a passive viewer.
And you think those are sort of accurate ways of measuring engaged viewership rather than just sort of baseline viewership? Are there other sort of levers you can pull in terms of really understanding how people are not just fans of content, but also maybe engaging directly with it? I mean, thinking about commenting or sort of using the IP in their own creative ways.
Yeah, so engagement metrics we've used for a long time. And I think many publishers and many of our competitors have always used engagement to help drive the content pipeline and understand how to sort of optimize content for the relevant platforms. And that's still increasingly important in understanding sort of if you're a fan of content, you will do more than just view. You will comment, you will share, you will get involved and sort of answer the questions from other audience members. I think that's where we really see sort of a lot of positive community engagement, where we see our fans being advocates for us. I think for us, there are a lot of different measures that we're using for fandom. But what's really important for us is that we are building that fandom and understanding what they want from us. So being able to not only optimize our content pipeline, but also think about what else can we offer them. Where there are fans crying out for more from us, they don't just want more content. They want more opportunities to be a fan and showcase their fandom, which is why we're really excited that we are going to do so much more this coming autumn. And we are launching our first market owned and operated e-commerce, which is built for fans for fans.
Oh, well, tell me a little bit more about what's going to be involved with the e-commerce play there.
So we really have been doubling down on our fandom first strategy, which we've talked a lot about in terms of that goes beyond that casual viewership to cultivate that deep, lasting emotional connection. We're leaning into communities that already love our brands. So we're building a owned and operated e-commerce strategy and delivery around those big fandoms. So for us, number one is obviously Bluey.
Okay.
Who has an amazing global fandom. But we also have fandom brands such as Doctor Who and Top Gear. Doctor Who is having a moment to launch this incredible range of sort of fandom-built product merch at San Diego Comic-Con, which is just around the corner. And that will kickstart us in a strategy that really is, as I say, built by fans across a wide range of fandoms, everything from Hey Dougie to Top Gear to BBC Earth, but also to fandoms that, have been possibly ones that we haven't nurtured in the past, and ones that we're leaning back into our archive and thinking about where are the fandoms sort of already exist for us that we can really deliver more for. So for us, this is basically creating that ecosystem around an already engaging sort of fan system.
Where exactly is the e-commerce play going to live and sit? And I guess secondary to that is, what are the types of products that you're looking to sell against all the different IP you mentioned? Because I imagine, given that fandom is a thing that you can interact with on a lot of different platforms, and so I can imagine, given how fragmented the media ecosystem is, understanding exactly where to put the e-commerce play and where that sits is a difficult strategy, really.
I think it goes back to meeting the audience where they are. And so for us, it's not about creating sort of one central place. It's about creating that ecosystem that turns up where it's most relevant. So our strategy is about building opportunities within social e-commerce, our owned and operated and across our branded websites, as well as a really clear affiliate play. So that we aren't trying to say that we are trying to drive audiences to one place. We are, again, being as relevant as we can in the places that are meaningful to our audiences. So there is, a thriving sort of social e-commerce play on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. We will turn up there, as well as the fact that we already have a massive addressable audience through our newsletters and our branded websites. We will also turn up there. So again, it's about meeting our fandom where they want to engage with us and showing them a range of products that are going to be as meaningful to them as they are to us. So our play is the sort of, if you know, you know, and therefore finding those Easter eggs within our fandoms that mean that we can really tap in to that advocacy and they're finding something that they won't find anywhere else.
I've noticed that a lot of other publishers I've spoken with are also sort of leaning into e-commerce plays a little bit more. Just 2 interviews I've conducted in the past month are with Reach and Good Housekeeping, and they've both sort of cited growth in that business. Whether or not it's selling things on TikTok Shop or places like that, which sounds like similar idea in terms of where you're targeting across the board on different social platforms. How do you make sure that commercially is viable in the long term? I mean, how much revenue are you looking to drive, at least to begin with, from these types of businesses? Is it a really long-term play? Or are you expecting to see relatively quick revenue created through this opportunity?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think this is why it's fandom first, because I think it depends upon the type of fandom you have. I think we're expecting that as a BBC Studios play, this is long term. We think we'll see sort of early opportunity with some of our fandoms that are so deeply invested with us that we see them, doing lots of things, buying, we have already really clear indicators of who in with our sort of addressable fan base is already not only watching content, but also going to our live events, and sort of going to sort of, bigger things like Bluey's Big Play or camp in the US. So we know where we're sort of really going to thrive and deliver in-year opportunity. I think for us, we are really in a privileged position that we have got some really dedicated global fan bases that we can build from. Those competitors that you mentioned, I really wish them well, but I think that ultimately you can only compete in this space in the short-term view if you've got a fan base that feels that you are as relevant to them as sort of a mass retailer.
So BBC Studios recently revealed it's seen really strong engagement on some of the platforms. And we've already mentioned a couple of them, YouTube and TikTok being especially sort of pointed out. What were some of the key figures, and how are you making sure that you're measuring that engagement accurately? Because a view on YouTube is different from a listen on Spotify, is different from a view on TikTok. And I know that we've already talked a little bit about the difference between views and vanity metrics and real engagement, but I just want to make sure I understand actually the scope and breadth of BBC Studios engagement on different platforms.
We've spoken before that I sort of, my view, and I think that sort of, most of the industry is now starting to shift to this, is that views are a false economy. And that, as you say, and I think there's been a sort of recent sort of graph that has made the rounds on LinkedIn and other platforms that showing that every single platform has a different type of measurement for a view, and it can range and also be non-existent. So I think there's a real opportunity for publishers to take more of an ownership stake on sort of how they measure their own fandom and find the right balance and blend of really thinking about where you're building on borrowed ground and the metrics that you use in the space where you don't have an own audience, and where you can sort of merge and blend that with the data that you have that is owned. And I think for us, we are making sure that we're not only using tools like Tubular, which help us measure and compare against our competitors when it comes to sort of watch time and other metrics, but that we also use other tools and our in-house data analytics team to make sure that we have a really clean understanding of our own measures and how we stack up.
How do you translate beyond the e-commerce play? How do you translate that into revenue? Is it really more of a direct relationship that you're trying to foster with brands and advertisers? Is it working through the agency environment? Obviously, there's lots of change going on at the moment within different media agencies in the UK. How are you managing those different relationships?
I think it's an interesting question because there's always, as I said, there's always going to be risk when you build on that borrowed ground, because algorithms shift, platforms can decide on sort of how that algorithm works, and you're sort of playing with that risk. What we can't ignore, this is where the audiences are going. And therefore you have to play there. You have to be able to create a compelling and relevant opportunity for your audiences in these places. However, you've got to find that balance. For us in the current landscape, the balance of our owned and operated and operating with all of the social partners is really key. I think for us, we are about nurturing our own ecosystem and finding the right role for each brand and not going into a platform just for the sake of operating there, but really being thoughtful about is our audience there for starters? Does our audience want to hear from us there? Do we have a right to play and a right to win? And ultimately that will then shape a strategy that puts the audience at the heart of what we're doing, and we'll see commercial opportunity because we will be able to understand what our audience wants from us. To give you a really clear example, there is a lot of things that we're thinking about how we diversify our commercial opportunities with a brand like Bluey, because the fandom is so immense and has grown so quickly. There's the opportunity for us to not only think about diversifying into an owned and operated e-commerce play, but also what does that mean when you've got a watch time of 76 minutes on YouTube? And for us, that is such a powerful play that we start thinking about other things. So what would it mean if we started to look at a subs model? What would it mean if we started to look at sort of our own fast channel? Like that for us, that becomes, if you have doubled down on fandom and if you have some really compelling relevance and sort of emotional connection stats, that then spirals into more commercial opportunity.
It's interesting because it's a strategy that is not uncommon necessarily, but the idea of figuring out where the audiences exist and then figuring out how to commercialize them, it strikes me as, I mean, you've mentioned the risk involved of going to the platforms and maybe platforms are a friend today and not a friend the next day, and publishers have gotten burnt in the past. And yet there is still the sense of, well, if people are there, we need to be there, and then we'll work out how to make money eventually at some point, right? Does that give you pause at all? Do you ever want to go into a platform and say, we're coming into it with a commercial strategy first and foremost, if that makes sense?
It does make sense. However, I think if you don't put an audience at the heart of your strategy, there's an even greater risk than having not thought about your commercial strategy to start with. I think you first need to understand who your audience is and where you find them. And then you start to prioritize those platforms based on profitability and thinking about, okay, to give you an example that we struggle with, YouTube is a very mature platform and that we have been working with for over a decade. And we have a healthy relationship with YouTube as a partner. And we have a thriving ecosystem there that drives a huge amount of revenue for us. But we know that our audience is also on TikTok. We know that there is a thriving opportunity for us with Bluey, but Bluey, it was the first preschool brand on TikTok and the fastest growing preschool brand. That is still yet to showcase that it can drive as much ROI as YouTube, but we're still there. We're just prioritizing it differently. We know our audience is there. We know that we need to cultivate that fandom so that when we have the opportunity to actually make money here, which is coming up later this year, we'll be in a really great position. If you wait for the commercial opportunity and you haven't invested because you didn't care because the revenue wasn't there, but you knew your audience was there, you've missed it because you've missed that run up. You have missed the opportunity to really cultivate that fandom. We're in a really privileged position because as soon as we are able to hit the opportunity of having our own partner sales on TikTok and being able to do our own branded content through TikTok, we already have an incredible multi-generational fandom that makes it really easy to win.
You've mentioned YouTube and TikTok. I'm curious how you think about BBC Studios content on some of the other platforms, whether that's Instagram, Reddit, Snap, even Pinterest. How do you view different opportunities across the different sort of social landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it comes back to how you prioritize those platforms. We turn up on many of those platforms, but not all. And I think for us, it's going, are we there for the audience long play? We are on Snapchat because our portfolio needs to catch up with where Snap is at. But we're not on something like Reddit. We used to be. And I think there's definitely opportunity for us to sort of start thinking about where we can do. But ultimately, I think for us, our priority right now is where we see fandom growth. Our fandom growth is not happening on some of those platforms. And that could be because of the platform itself. It could be because we don't have the right analytics because we're not getting enough data from those platforms. Or it might be because ultimately they still haven't worked out the right product for our audience. And for us, we are always thinking about sort of the new opportunities as well as, relationships that we have with some of those platforms and being clear as to fandom opportunity and the commercial opportunity.
Could it be because the algorithm hasn't decided that they love your shows, that people haven't taken to your productions on that platform?
Could it be that we're doing a bad job on that platform?
No, well, it depends on how much control you think you have over the algorithm. So you could read that question as maybe we're not doing a good enough job in exerting that level of control, or maybe we just don't have that much control over how our content shows up to people on the platform. I mean, something that, just to speak for myself as a young journalist, struggle with is getting noticed on certain platforms because the algorithm might not love me if I don't have enough followers already. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I guess because of the lack of control you have over how you show up in people's algorithmic feeds, what the adjacency looks like, surely these are things that you're concerned about. Even if you're still seeing evidence that you're building fandom, you might not even understand how that's happening, right?
It's a really great question. And I think sort of the thing that strikes me is where there is a platform where you it's a pay to play. Like, unless you're sort of paying and you're not going to get surfaced, that's where we don't sort of deign to kind of sort of throw huge amounts of paid media behind that. We ultimately believe that our organic strategy should work for the algorithm. And if it doesn't, we don't have the right portfolio. I think for me, Snap is a really clear one where I'm going, we don't have the right portfolio yet because I don't want to pay to play. I think that is wasting money on an opportunity that isn't going to drive return on ad spend for me, not even this year or next year. And therefore, we need to kind of go, yes, Snap is a great partner, but we need to think about what's our new IP strategy. Where do we want to look for IP that can work not just on platforms that work for us currently, but things that I really feel that we haven't unlocked yet. So whether we're doing it right, because I think there are times when I look at our strategy and go, we should really think about, do we have enough of a disciplined muscle when it comes to some of those platforms? And I think something like Pinterest for that, because I think that's a very different type of platform and we're very much geared towards video, and some of the sort of social platforms that don't, like Reddit or Pinterest and things, I think possibly we're not geared up for that. And is the juice worth the squeeze on trying to do that? Possibly not right now. But the pay to play model bothers me, because if that's how you have to control the algorithm, it takes all the creativity out of it.
I think that's fair to say. What about working with creators? I mean, given the BBC's status as a very trusted brand, but also a publicly funded enterprise that has its own stringent standards. I mean, we don't have to bring up the impartiality issue, but that's certainly been an issue for your colleagues in BBC News recently. I mean, how do you make sure you're balancing the relationship with creators on these platforms in a responsible way?
It's an interesting question. So BBC Studios isn't publicly funded. We are commercially funded. And obviously, we work hand in hand with BBC Public Service. But there's different criteria that BBC Studios think about when they're working with creators in comparison to our public service colleagues. So for us, we have been on a journey to make sure that we are acting like a creator and thinking about moving our metrics, moving our content strategy, and moving to a different partnership with creators. And for us, that's about those shared values and thinking about what is that value exchange. What we offer as sort of a global sort of digital studio versus the thing that we are really always striving for, which is a really clear relevance with both our audiences today and our audiences of tomorrow. For us, how we want to work with creators is a really clear partnership. So working through TalentWorks, which is our in-house talent agency, in making sure we don't manage talent themselves. We manage the connection of our amazing IP and also to our commercial ecosystem. So not only do we've got commercial partnerships with the likes of the social platforms that we've already talked about. We're about to launch e-commerce. We also have our own in-house partner sales team that know how to sell social first fandoms in comparison to kind of just selling reach and audiences. There's a lot for us to be able to support creators, and a lot for them to be able to learn off of us, and so much that we can learn off of them. So for me, it's about that partnership and really understanding how we can connect creators to our infrastructure and how we can then connect to their audiences and learn off of how they talk to them and how they produce their content pipeline. The big difference between us and them is not really about distribution. It is about how we think about why we create content. They create content for their audiences day in, day out. They're thinking about that 24/7 so that they are developing that sort of two-way relationship. They're not thinking sort of about how they sort of distribute across multiple different platforms and sort of EBITDA and sort of how they make sure that sort of, they're profitable in 5 years versus profitable next month. That's a discipline and an infrastructure that we can help them support on.
One of the pain points that comes up often with regard to the creator economy that when I've spoken with different marketers is that it's hard to get a consistent brand message across when you're working with a creator that also has their own consistent brand message that they are pushing with their own audience. And so they might, you might be able to sort of latch on to whatever the creator is doing, but your brand could potentially get lost in the middle of it all. How do you make sure that, when working with creators who are promoting your own BBC Studios fandoms, that doesn't get lost? I mean, what kind of advice would you give?
I think that's all in the choice, who you're working with and how you brief them. Because ultimately, if your brand's getting lost, you have essentially mucked up on one of those two. If you haven't chosen someone that can extend your brand storytelling and without having to modify themselves, then you have mucked up. Sorry, I'm trying not to swear. Mucked up on it's a natural thing for me. So it's
I
difficult.
also swear a lot, and swearing's okay on this podcast for what it's worth.
Okay. In terms of you've made the wrong decision in that first one. If you've chosen someone that has to alter themselves in order to tell your story correctly, they're not the right creator for you. Then you've got to be thoughtful around it. Can't be about like we have briefed our influencer and they are going to do some marketing for us. It has to be that you have done a shared briefing in which you understand their audience, they understand your audience, you understand each other's values, and you understand that there is a shared outcome for the two of you. If you haven't treated it like that and you've treated it like an extension of your marketing budget, then again, you have mucked up because you will get something that feels forced, you will get something that feels like an advertorial, and people won't respond. So I think for me, it's those two critical things, as well as an underlying understanding that if you don't allow creators and your audience to play with your brand in the right way, you haven't understood where we're at in 2025. Like, what are you actually trying to protect? Because if you become across as like you won't let any, like you can't come out of your box, you're never going to be meaningful and relevant to your audience, and you certainly won't be in 5 years.
So what is next then? In 5 years' time, where would you like to see BBC's sort of digital journey evolve from and to?
Oh, the ambitions I have. We're doubling down on community and commerce for us by building that thriving fandom across multiple different IPs allows us to do so much more, like our first move into our owned and operated e-commerce. But what do I want to do with that fandom? For me, is so much more than just moving into e-commerce. For us, it is about building a sort of studio that can rival some of our competitors out there. It's not just about building fandoms for us. It's about managing and operating other fandoms. So moving into a third-party space. We announced earlier this year in Cannes that for the first time we'll be managing Akamai's IP Bing. For us, that is just the start. We see ourselves moving more into being a studio and working with other amazing IP. We want to build that out. We have a real foothold in kids and family. And for us, being able to not only manage sort of a growing ecosystem, but ideally ourselves be able to build out that sort of partner sales around a growing ecosystem is really important. So for me, that is a massive ambition for us to become a sort of kids and family digital studio. And then for us, really thinking about what is the opportunity to build upon the creator sort of first talent works? How do we really push that to make sure that we are thinking about the big opportunities? How do we find new IP there? How do we build new formats with creators that is sort of made for social but has a whole other life within BBC Studios ecosystem? So ideally, we become sort of a fandom first agency for the digital future.
And how much of that would involve sort of branded content? And I feel like that's such a buzzword among many of the publishers I speak with.
Yeah, branded content is, when done right, incredibly powerful for sort of both parties collaborating. I think, branded content's been around for a long time, since my early agency days, but I think it has matured into something that is really being driven by the creator economy. And I think for us, having that sort of really clear triangle, sort of like we will find the relevant creators for us and for our advertisers that will sit and work alongside our incredible portfolio and IP and work with the right advertisers. Branded content has become a thriving opportunity for us. We only launched branded content, I want to say, just over a year ago, and it is our biggest growth area this year and is going to be year on year in terms of our growth over sort of like 150% year on year growth for us. I think that is because branded content only works when it's trusted by the audience, that it's not an advertorial. And therefore we can do that because we've got amazing storytelling, but we have really clear guidelines on how to make it not an advertorial. And therefore the opportunity to work with us is that connect to our amazing fandoms, realize the opportunity through our global scale, and do that with social first producers.
Only got one final question. It's a bit of a curveball relative to the rest of the conversation, but I'll try and tie it all together. I mean, we've talked about your views on the measurement ecosystem, obviously lots of sort of change and innovation that you're trying to bring to BBC Studios and the strategy. If you could change one thing about how the current media industry in the UK here is operating, what would you like to see people do differently or think about in a different way?
I think there has been a constant sort of versus conversation. Like it's TV versus streaming. It's TV and streaming versus YouTube. It's YouTube versus the rest of the social sphere. I think that I would like to see people acknowledge that, yes, there are issues with having a fragmented ecosystem and having lots of different platforms at play. But ultimately, we shouldn't be pitting ourselves against each other. Actually, it's all about making sure that us as a individual creator identity, as whether you are a BBC Studios or YouTube or sort of insert publisher platform sort of channel here, that you're held accountable for how you treat the audience and what your content pipeline looks like and how relevant is it. So I would like to see people not pit everything against each other, because what's the point of that? I think that's about advertiser money, and it's not about the audience.
Something to keep in mind, definitely. Jasmine, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, Trisonic. You can find all our episodes on the podcast platform of your choice or on our website at uk.themedialeader.com. But do please remember to subscribe to be notified of our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest news stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.